Welcome to Porch Play Chats, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately termed IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. And so in order to promote more play in the lives of young children, we've created these Porch Play Chats. And these are conversations about a topic that our presenters are passionate about that will help us incorporate more play into children's lives and to sort of give us an opportunity to reflect on how we view play and view play in the classroom. And so I'm Deb Lawrence, the president of IPA USA, and joining me on the porch is Lisa Murphy. Hi, Lisa.
Hello. I had to move inside. I had to leave the porch due to internet connection, so I'm up in the studio room.
But she has a beautiful porch. And then with us is Harrison Pinckney, who is the assistant professor at Clemson University. And so Harrison is starting us off on a series. And this is a 3-part series, which you'll be able to view on Mondays for the next 3 weeks. And the series is called Play, Childhood, and Race. A really important topic, one that I wish we'd been talking about for much longer than we're talking about, just starting today, but you have to start somewhere. And this is the first one. And then next week, there'll be the second in the series, and then the last week is the third in the series. And we're hoping to have more series as we move forward. And so, Harrison, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're glad to have you. So I'm going to start you off with a question. What is the state of play for children who are Black?
Right. That is a tall order to answer. I think the probably most direct way to answer this question is to ask everybody to sort of reflect on what do we believe about play in general, and what have we come, through your organization and so many other associations that talk about the importance of play. What are the benefits? What are the necessities for play? And then recognize that where Black youth are concerned, a lot of those benefits are never experienced or altered or denied. And that's probably the most direct way to answer that question. For a range of reasons, the play experience is interrupted for Black children, Black teenagers, and Black young adults. And we could say even into later adulthood, but definitely in those 3 areas, we see that it is completely disrupted in a number of ways. And that's the simplest way to at least start the chat.
So go ahead, Lisa.
I bet we're going to ask the same question. Are you able to share some of the ways, like examples of that?
Yes, absolutely. And so in having this conversation, first, want to acknowledge that this is not new, right? This is not a new phenomenon that has happened in the last, 10 or 15 years. We have documented cases all the way back to, the 50s and even earlier than that, where what we have seen is that Black youth in particular are monitored and policed in a very different manner compared to other youth. And so when you think about the average young person out on a basketball court, or going for a swim at the local pool, or just going for a jog, or around the neighborhood, playing free play in their own front yard, recognizing that there's the increased potential of neighbors, other patrons in those play spaces, or even the police department, local law enforcement, actually monitoring and interrupting play for those particular youth. There are penalties that Black youth may experience in those play spaces that other youth may not ever even come close to having to deal with. And so that's why I say it's often altered or denied. And so in some cases, when we talk about the denial of play, you'll find parents making decisions where their kids aren't allowed to go to certain locations, certain neighborhoods to play. There might be certain forms of play that parents will say, you can't engage in this, or you can engage in this, but you have to alter it in this way. So as an example, good friend of mine, his sons have these sort of toy Nerf guns and pellet guns, and they do the safety stuff and make sure you're not aiming for the head and the eyes, because even Nerf guns can be hurtful. But they tell their kids, you can only play in the backyard. And you can only play with this family in the neighborhood because we know that family well enough, and we know that there are no consequences. But they recognize that the moment that their kids leave the backyard and go just a few feet into the front yard, now other neighbors may start looking and saying, wait a minute, those kids are playing with guns. And even though it's really not reasonable to expect a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old to be in the front yard aiming real guns at each other as a form of play and shooting them, we have seen that onlookers will make this quantum leap to automatically assume that this is a dangerous situation and that these kids need to be sort of put in check. And so just one example of, again, how play is altered or prohibited. So yeah, we know the kids are going to do sort of this neighborhood game of laser tag or pellet guns or whatever it is, but you're not allowed to play, because we know that the consequences can be very different for you.
Wow.
So I know, I know that, but hearing it like that makes it go, whoa.
Especially with the double standard, because would that same onlooker have had the same reaction if they were two, white kids? And
Yeah.
We know the answer is probably going to be no.
Right.
And so go ahead, Harrison.
So I want to give you one more example that's really interesting. 2015, McKinney, Texas, there was a pool party that took place, and you all may be aware of this. There was a community and the homeowners association. They had a pool that everyone in the community could use. And so one of the teenagers, reached out to their friends, and how, especially in the age of mobile technology, you send out one text or something, and everybody now shows up to this pool. So 75 kids plus actually show up to participate in this pool party. So a parent calls the police, and the police arrive, and this is a predominantly white neighborhood, but there's some Black kids who show up, and they're guests of whoever lives in the neighborhood, and I don't right off recall the race of the host. But what happens is the police, and a lot of police show up to this, and one of the kids who's attending this party actually takes out his cell phone and begins to record everything. And you can see in this recording, you see the police, and they're running past white teenagers and tackling Black teenagers. Wow. Now they're all engaged in the same activity. And they're aiming their guns, unholstered, aiming their guns at the Black teenagers, demanding that they sit down. At one point, a 15-year-old girl who was in her bathing suit gets slammed to the ground. Male police officer, white male police officer picks this girl up and slams her to the ground. Oh my God. And it's outrageous. First off, that you would respond to a pool party with guns, and you really just go out and maybe have a talk with the teenagers, figure out what's going on. It's very blatant when you see it on video that certain kids are being run right past and other kids are being told to sit down. And when you start to interview the kids, you actually hear some of the white kids saying, man, it was like I was invisible. It was like I wasn't even there. The police never asked me a single question. But then I'm seeing my Black friends being tackled. I see my Black friends being told to sit down, some being put in handcuffs. And that's just one of those examples, because sometimes it's, some people could, pass this off as hearsay, right? Well, you don't know what really happened. We weren't there. Or, how were they supposed to know that this kid wasn't safe and then that kid was safe? And here we have now a situation of 75, almost 100 kids playing in a pool. and it is clear that all of them, except for skin tone, they all are the same age. They all have on the same attire. So no one is dressed in a suspicious way. Everyone is wearing bathing suits. And in this particular case, this young lady who gets slammed to the ground, she's actually challenging the authority of the police, like, why are you doing this to us? And this is what causes him to be angered. And you know, to see it and to see it unfold right in front of you, and then to have kids of different racial backgrounds saying, hey, yeah, it was clear that some of us were safe and some of us weren't. And even we're confused as to how this took place. And it's still available on YouTube to go and watch this video and other outlets. But it is a clear, you know, example that there's a double standard that exists in our country, where certain groups of people, and more specifically Black kids, even at, you know, 8 and 9 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old, are considered criminals and treated as such in a space where they should be allowed to play and be free and explore and have fun and really drop the cares of this world around them. They should be able to do that, and they still are unable to do that.
So Harrison, that is certainly a powerful example. And unfortunately, I think, though I'm very fortunate that now we have cell phone footage of these instances, because I do agree with you. People would say, oh, I'm sure that didn't really happen, or they're just making that up, or yeah, it's just exaggerated, or you don't know what happened right before, or, you know, I hear that still on the news when we have video footage. And we know that this has been systemic and gone on for lots of time that it shouldn't have gone on for, right? And I think that makes us feel uncomfortable and makes us have to begin to confront what is actually happening, because we can't avoid it anymore, right? And, you know, sometimes, you know, I'm always trying to give excuses for people, and you know, sometimes I'm thinking, you know, sometimes these feelings and the way that we're interacting with people comes from fear, right? That we don't are, and you know, going back to how the brain functions, the brain does not like surprises, right? So it likes things to be the same, and you know, otherwise it escalates itself and releases all those hormones and things, and that make us react in a way that we might not react to if we weren't fearful to begin with. But that doesn't excuse it.
Right.
Right? Yes, that's the way the brain operates. You know, you're in line for the first time you've ever been on a roller coaster. You're standing in line and you're looking forward to it, but your palms are sweating, your heart's racing, you're breathing faster, because your brain's like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
People are screaming. Why are you standing in this line, right? Until it experiences the roller coaster. And if it was a pleasant experience, it says, oh, let's do it again. But how can we use that same, you get in line at the roller coaster, even though your palms are sweaty and your heart rate's up and you're breathing faster? Why can't you stop a minute and reflect on why your brain is responding this way?
That makes you pick up the phone to tattle on a bunch of kids in a pool.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's you used the word systemic a moment ago, and I think that there's this space of play that we're looking at, right? But there are so many other entities that are external to that play space that all contribute to this narrative that Black people, including Black children, should not be trusted. And the challenge that I think we have is that we can talk to teachers, we can talk to after school programs, we can talk to you know, park districts and you know, YMCAs and anyone else that provides opportunities for people to play. But that alone is going to be insufficient, that there are still all of these other entities. We have to talk to neighbors, And we have to start convincing neighbors. We have to talk to housing authorities, right? I think about the McKinney pool, Texas pool incident, and the bottom line was these kids don't belong in our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who's determined that one neighborhood is appropriate for white children and a different neighborhood is appropriate for Black children? Who's made that determination?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a history there, right? And so the banks have made that determination. Real estate associations have made that determination. And even if we look at the history of redlining, our own government has been complicit in some of this, right? And this is the challenge that we're facing. And so when we look at, why kids can't go in certain neighborhoods, it's not just if we have some conversations and we convince people that they should, stop and think for a moment. Well, no, we have to also convince real estate, agencies that, hey, when you are selling a home, we have to stop, this narrative that your home, that the property value of your home and the quality of your neighborhood is going to drop because certain people move in. This is a narrative that has been, reiterated since the 40s in this country, and so we have to think about those things. We have to have conversations with members of our local law enforcement to start thinking twice about how are you really engaging in these and responding to these phone calls. What are the policies that we have in place for when we respond to a call about children? And it is hard for me to fathom a situation in which it's appropriate to your first response is to pull out a gun when a child is involved, unless we have a clear indication that the child is armed and the child is threatening to take someone else's life. But in any other situation, this is probably not appropriate. So when we think about Grand Rapids, Michigan, I want to say 2017, I believe it was, maybe 18. And there were some kids that were participating at the Kroc Center, and the Kroc Center is a nonprofit organization that is funded and managed through the Salvation Army. And we have about 20 of those around the country. And they're really beautiful facilities. We have one here in Greenville, South Carolina, really nice facility. And so the kids were there, they were playing basketball, and they were headed home. And some police decide that they need to stop these four kids and ask them about their whereabouts. A few minutes prior, apparently there was a disturbance at the Kroc Center. And so the police, received the call, and they see these four kids, and they were ranging in age from 12 to about 14. And the police officer jumps out of the car with his gun already aimed at the children. And again, on video, right? So this isn't hearsay. And this is his body camera. And you hear these kids, and they're sobbing, boo-hoo crying audibly, saying, I don't want to die. What did we do wrong? Where's my mom, right? And so the Kroc Center did everything appropriate. You could argue that in that space of play, everything that needed to happen in order for those kids to feel safe and comfortable and welcomed and invited was taking place. But it was that walk from the Kroc Center back home where the negative interaction took place and the potential loss of life. We could, fortunately these kids made it home, but it could have been loss of life. And even on the video, you hear neighbors coming out of their home and asking questions, and the police telling them, this is none of your business, go back inside, right? And this is a problem. This is and again, so it's not just, what can we do to stop and think and pause and ask ourselves about, should I call the police right now on kids playing, or should I leave it alone? Should I engage? There are so many factors that are intertwined here that, again, Deb, using your word of systemic, this is a systemic problem where there are multiple institutions that have to be, sort of called to the carpet and held accountable, and their policies need to be addressed, and the way in which they interact with one another. All of these things really need to be looked at. And so it's more than just trying to convince a neighbor, hey, don't call the police.
But and I agree with you. It's such a multi-layered historical problem, right?
Mhm.
It's been a problem for a long time. And if I'm a teacher, I will tell you that I made a conscious decision that where I live after the George Floyd incident, anytime I see a person of color pulled over by a police officer, I will get out of my car and ask if they're okay. And I have done that. And that was something that I could do that
Mhm.
would make me feel like I was doing something. And people are like, "Well, aren't you afraid you're going to be shot?" And I said, "Well, I'm white. I'm not that worried about it, right?" But I feel like it's something I have to do to try to make a difference. So I'm a teacher in an early care and education program, and I'm seeing children bully each other because one child is one color and one child is another color. Instead of ignoring it, I
Mhm.
need to do something about it,
Right.
right? Without making either child feel like I don't want to say that they haven't done something wrong, but I need each child to be able to express themselves so that they can understand each other's viewpoints, right? And if I'm talking about 4 and 5 year olds, it might be a very short conversation, but I don't want to. I feel like what we do with the bullies is we bully the bullies who then continue to bully, right?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to figure out how, as a teacher in a classroom, I can approach a situation that is discriminatory in some way, perhaps based on that other child's culture and experiences. How what are some practical things that I can do in a classroom with young children to help them understand, because again, again, parents are a child's first teachers, but sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it isn't.
Right. Right. Right.
So how do I
Um.
honor the parents, honor the children, but tackle this situation?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. Um. That is a good question. Um. I. It appears to me that there are possibly three things that I would say that teachers could possibly, work towards. One um, is for teachers, and I would just say anyone who is saying I really want to be more engaged in this conversation. I want to, make a stronger contribution. I think the first step is really understanding our own biases,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes uh, teachers or community members, you know, park, worker, we have the best of intentions, but we don't recognize that, hey, there are some biases that I've developed over the years that I just have never really put into check, right? And I remember when I was a student, I remember reading a really interesting study where some licensed school psychologists were giving some case files to read and to make some recommendations on some students' behavior. And what they found was, as they were going through these cases, they were actually really just repeating some of the same cases over and over, like same 3 or 4 cases over and over. They were just changing the gender or the race.
The
And what they
race.
were finding was, so the psychologists were actually the ones that were being studied, not the kids. And so
Mhm.
what they found was the psychologist, we could say, we have a 5-year-old kid who is throwing blocks in the classroom. Okay, and they just changed the race, but it's still the same 5-year-old. Everything else is the same, just the race changes. And what they were finding was um, the primary recommendation where it was a white youth that was throwing blocks was counseling. Right, this is something abnormal. Something must be going wrong in the home. This is not typical behavior, and so they really need to see a counselor. And then when it was a black youth, it was this student should be suspended. This student should experience detention. This student should be expelled, something of more punishment, than actual corrective type of intervention. And the suggestion was that this is what we should expect from Black youth, right? So you nip it in the bud, versus if a white youth is doing it, then no, there must be something wrong in the home. There must be, they're speaking out and they're telling us that there's a problem, and we need to get to the bottom of what that problem is, and therapy will help us get there. These are licensed professionals who did 4 years of undergrad and a minimum of 4 years of grad school. These are people with PhDs, people that we would look to help us solve the world's problems. And they still have these biases that they're unaware of. And so if you can see that with someone who has done education on top of education, on top of education, on top of training, on top of, and probably took courses that dealt with issues of race and diversity, and still unable to recognize their own bias in how they approach work. And so I say that to suggest that, that's the first thing that all of us have to do. Recognize what might be some biases that I am unaware of. Yes, it's great to acknowledge that I'm taking some steps in certain areas to make sure that I am a voice and advocate and helping others. But what are some of those more subtle things that I'm unaware of? And so that's the first thing that I would encourage teachers to do. The second thing that I would say is, I think there needs to be more efforts and attempts to be proactive as opposed to reactive. So yes, we have the bully situation that you presented, and you have to react and respond to that in a way. But are we taking from the very first, step in class, from day one, are we taking steps to be proactive in how we discuss diversity, how we discuss acceptance, how we discuss celebration of differences? Right? And are we from day one starting to embrace that? Are we weaving this into our curriculum so it's not just okay, well today guys, we're going to talk about this particular group. We're going to talk about, African Americans and their contributions to society. But is there a regular ongoing theme throughout the school year and throughout every single aspect of who we are as a class, that this is something that we value? Right. And so do we talk about the platinum rule, right? The golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule, treat others the way they want to be treated. And really start, even for a 5-year-old, to understand that, hey, have you thought about how your actions influences this person? How would you feel if someone walked up to you and did X, Y, and Z? Does that become the culture of the classroom? And then the last step is, we talk about families, and we talk about, the role of parents, and we know our families are extremely influential in this process, extremely, and so for all of the, wonderful efforts and attempts we may make in the classroom and in the halls of our schools and in our after school programs and summer camps and things of that nature, it is still hard to overcome what messages some young people are receiving at home. And so the question becomes, how do we address those messages? How do we intervene when possible? And it's work. Yes, it's extra work, but that's what it's going to take for us to get to a better future for our kids. But are we sending home resources? Are we thinking about ways that we're encouraging families to continue conversations at home? And, some parents might be wide open and receptive to certain conversations, but do we need to be more subtle in thinking about how do we present this topic, where we're looking at readings that may not necessarily deal with race, but it's just talking about someone who's different. And how do you embrace and accept that person? And then handing that reading off to families to say, this is what we talked about today. Can you talk about this around the dinner table tonight? Or this is the homework assignment. And parents, we need you to be involved in this homework assignment in order for your child to be successful. Is it going to win everybody over? Absolutely not. Is every parent going to embrace, all of these ideas? No, that's an impossible ask. We know the basic math assignment every parent isn't helping out with, but it does start to pave that path forward where these families might stop, one or two families may stop and say, we never really thought about that, or we never really considered this. You might find, that families having that conversation, it starts to influence classroom behavior, classroom interactions. And so those three things off the top of my head that I would suggest. But I think overall, it really is that reminder that it's hard work, and it's tedious work that we have to prepare ourselves for it in order to make some changes.
Well, and I think, Harrison, all wonderful points, and I think what teachers need to recognize is this is so systemic that you have to start with what you can control in your classroom, right? You have to, that's the place you can start, and then you can make a difference for all children if you just take that step of having these conversations and reading stories and helping kids share their cultures in the classroom, and showing that it's not always the color of your skin that makes your culture different. Because I grew up in South Texas. My culture is very different than Lisa's, who may have grown up in another state. We're both white, but our cultures are very different. And so sometimes I think people are associating culture with race, and so they're seeing more difference than they're seeing similarities, right? And so I think if teachers can help children share, what's your favorite food at home? What's, what's your favorite animal? What pets do you have? That so that they can see what they have in common. It it helps to reduce some of that fear that I think starts those physiological reactions in our body
Yeah.
when we're afraid, instead
Right.
of instead of seeing
Hmm.
individuals as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I agree with you, and I think what I would also challenge teachers to consider is that as your students age, so the conversation that you would have with the kindergartners who are 5 years old should look different from some of those exercises that you would do with a 10-year-old, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm,
maybe again, when you talk about this perception of fear, conversations might start having young people digging a little bit deeper at 10 and 12 years old, that might show like, well, can you explain why you were unable to do like a family tree, right, for example?
oh yeah.
And opening up, why is it that I don't know past 4 generations? And
Mhm,
and as much as um, uh, we see schools avoiding certain conversations about slavery, for example, we have to accept the reality that some families have heirlooms that go back to the 1800s, and then some families, they recognize once we get back into the earlier 1800s, we no longer have birth certificates to acknowledge who my family is. Now we have chattel records, right? And we have my you know grandfather 10 generations ago listed on the same document as a cow or as a horse,
mhm.
and helping these kids to understand that it's not as simple as, oh, well, just if you work hard here in this country, this is going to lead to a brighter future, but helping them to understand that the systematic, as you mentioned, the systematic processes that have created different outcomes for different families. Having kids understand, well, why is it that you don't have a pool in your neighborhood? Maybe they don't understand why they don't have a pool in their neighborhood and another group does. And it's much deeper than simply, well, my parents can afford to live over here and your parents can't. It's park systems making decisions in the 50s to close up pools in certain neighborhoods because they didn't want to have to allow them to be shared with Black kids, or park districts selling off certain properties because if they knew if it stayed private, now our kids can continue to own, our kids can continue to enjoy this without having the threat of sharing with someone who is a different color, a skin color. And I think that in celebrating those differences and in acknowledging the similarities, we still have to we have to prepare our kids for the reality that it's just, this is the world we live in. This is the world that has been built, and it's not fair to everyone. And so we can't just sugarcoat it and make it just, oh, well, as long as we focus on all of our similarities, we're golden, you know, but understanding that some of our differences are deliberate. Some of our differences have been deliberately created, and the narrative that is feeding the fear that we may have against one another has been manufactured, and it's not a, you know, if a lion comes walking in through my front door right now, there's a reason for me to be afraid of that lion. But if someone just walks in, you know, yeah, obviously if they walk in uninvited, there should be some concern. But if some visitor brings someone else over who doesn't look like me, it should not be a natural fear that arises. And understanding that fear has been fed to me. And I think that some of those, obviously not with 5-year-olds, but as these kids get older, I would challenge teachers to think about what are ways that we can talk about some of that history and some of those differences in a manner that allows everyone to, you know, sort of understand, you know, why my fear is irrational or irrational.
So, Harrison, thank you. That I think that has laid the foundation for this series and demonstrated that we need more information, right? So
Right.
teachers need tangible ways to make a difference in their classroom with young children so that we can, again, you know, Bev Boz used to say, start in a corner, right? Start small and build on it as you move through the school year. And I think those kinds of strategies will help teachers not only see that bias that might be explicit or implicit within them, but will also help them begin to forgive themselves for that implicit bias and change their practice, right? So I think it's really important that people recognize that that bias came from someplace, and it may be one that you thought you'd gotten over, right? But because we haven't really confronted it and made it evident, like those videotapes are making evidence for us, it it's something we still have to work through. And so I think that this was a great start to this series on play, childhood, and race. And I hope after the series of 3 we can do more to help deepen our understanding and help us be more reflective in the way that we're reacting in a classroom with children, because I think some of our reactions are deepening this sort of bias that is out there and discrimination. So to learn more about Porch Play Chats, please visit our website at IPA-USA.org. And Harrison, if you have any resources you'd like to send along, I'll put that up with our YouTube channel, so in the description of this series, so that folks can continue to explore their own selves and figure out what they need to work on personally. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing this conversation to take place.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Take good care.
It's nice to meet
Thank
you.
you. Very good.